My esteemed friends, did someone really win a trip to Disney World from playing Mario Tennis 64 through a Blockbuster promotion? If that sounds like a fever dream, then buckle in. Why was there never a Metroid 64, and how could the history of speedrunning been different had there been one? And there's a statue standing quietly in a castle courtyard for nearly 30 years that nobody, not even the texture matching bros, the internet's most dedicated researchers, have ever been able to identify. Today we're diving into 3 of the strangest and most compelling mysteries the Nintendo 64 has to offer. So pour yourself a warm beverage, or cold one if you prefer, and here we go.
Here we go!
Mario Tennis 64 is home to a couple of mysteries and oddities that sent me spiraling down a rabbit hole I never expected. And no, I'm not just talking about Blue Mario or why they chose to use Donkey Kong Jr. instead of Diddy Kong, though those are interesting in their own right. Like, there was actually a Blockbuster tournament embedded in the cartridge that presumably someone won, winning a trip to Disney World, and will likely never know who it was. And it gets even weirder from there. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So Mario Tennis and Mario Golf were both developed by Camelot, who've made quite a handful of games for Nintendo over the years. One interesting feature they added to both tennis and golf is a mysterious code entry page for tournaments. Tournaments, you might ask, on the Nintendo 64? Well, indeed, and that's what makes these so crazy. In Mario Golf, the code entry page is hidden behind another secret code. You have to enter the clubhouse area not by pressing just A, but by pressing R, Z, and then A. And only then do you hear Toad say OK, and you get a new area that you need to enter codes in. 10-digit strings of seemingly random alphanumerics. In Mario Tennis, these codes can be entered on a more basic menu, special game modes, resulting in various ring shot tournaments and competitions. But what are these tournaments? Because some are a lot weirder than others. Alright, have you ever heard of Camp Hyrule? It was a sort of online summer camp held by Nintendo, lasting a few days in length each summer, where you logged onto a world that looked something like a Neopets or a Club Penguin overworld, but obviously more Nintendo and summer camp themed, and you could participate in chat rooms, random minigames, and of course, gaming competitions. But what kind of competitions? Well, the Camp Hyrule stuff took place from about 1995 to 2006, and so some of these competitions had actually been planned out and pre-programmed into the cartridges of games at the time in this era, like Mario Golf and Mario Tennis. So the Camp Hyrule would tell you to input this 10-character code. This would unlock a challenge with certain parameters. You would play it, and then you would be given a results code looking something like this, a 20-digit alphanumeric code, which I suppose has your results secretly encrypted into it. You would then submit this code as your result to the good people at Nintendo, and this would prevent you from just lying about your score. You know, how could you figure out what the encoding is like? And voila, that's how these contests worked. This image out here is from a guy who claims to have won one of the Mario Golf tournaments and was sent a Mario Golf ball and tees as a souvenir, which is pretty amazing. And these were often just part of the larger Camp Hyrule picture, but not always. Some of the tournaments were themed or seemingly competed outside of Camp Hyrule. For example, some of the tournaments seem to involve Nintendo Power, so perhaps they were codes originally printed in one magazine, then you would submit your scores and the results would be published in a later magazine, maybe with some small prize. I'm yet to dig up any pages in Nintendo Power that show these. As you know, there's hundreds of issues to dig through with hundreds of pages each, but if I ever do come across them, I will definitely go spelunking or deep diving on them all. Likewise, there were some tournaments run through IGN, so perhaps the reward there was simply being announced or acknowledged on the website in some way. But here's the thing. The prize was not always some small pittance like a golf ball or your name in a magazine with a free subscription. In at least one case, it was pretty insane. The Blockbuster Cup was a Mario Tennis tournament held in this very format in September and October of the year 2000. Now, the game was released in Japan in July 2000, in North America in August 2000, and so, like, what a time to be alive. They were obviously trying to promote the game through Blockbuster. So in this tournament, you get to pick a character, but you always face off against Waluigi. The goal is to hit the ball through as many rings as you can in 5 minutes time. That's all there is to it. You just rally back and forth and collect the rings. They kind of spawn in randomly as you're playing, and so you have to learn a bit of how to shape your shots and hit lob shots or volleys or whatever, but it's pretty straightforward. The grand prize for this tournament was a trip to Disney World, which is just a truly remarkable thing to ponder. Like nowadays, whenever there's a corporate prize or giveaway, it often feels kind of rigged and unwinnable. But in this situation, it sounds like you could literally just grind this Waluigi Rings tournament, get your best score, and submit the encrypted results code. And someone out there presumably did so and won a trip to Disney World. That's the one in Orlando, by the way, and you can remember this by the ORL in World compared to Disneyland with the LA for Los Angeles. I know, I only learned that recently, but it's a great trick. Okay, now there were 2 ways to submit your score. One was online at Blockbuster.com, but it's the year 2000, not everyone has the internet at home. So another way to submit your score, the encrypted results code, was to write it on this Blockbuster card and drop it off at your nearby Blockbuster retail store. Such a card would be described as ephemera, a temporary sort of thing not meant to keep, but at least one still exists and has been listed on eBay recently for as much as $200. And that's where this picture comes from. Like, imagine getting the high score, the winning high score, writing down your results code in this card, and the Blockbuster employee losing it or not submitting it properly to whoever the main people running this contest were. And corporate contests are such an interesting rabbit hole to go down, but we'll do that some other time. You can just imagine some Blockbuster headquarters guy going into all the local Blockbuster branches and taking these cards and doing the promotion. I don't know, it's just crazy. But the point is this: someone out there, presumably, won a trip to Disney World from playing this silly rings challenge against Waluigi. And that's amazing. And we'll probably never know any more than that. If it was ever published, it seems to have been lost to time on the internet and in magazines, and maybe it wasn't published at all for the sake of privacy. It's just kind of amazing. We'll never know who actually won, nor what their score was. I mean, you can imagine some 13-year-old kid playing this a ton, asking his mom to rent it from Blockbuster, getting a great score, submitting it, getting contacted by Blockbuster Nintendo, and the rest is history. Such a person would be about 40 years old now. I suppose it's not impossible they watch my channel, but it's also possible they just moved on and no longer have interest in video games. It's such a jarring difference from the modern day, where we tend to know a good deal about the people who are atop the leaderboards in these very video games, even 25 or 30 years after their release. The community knows well the gamers and world record holders of today and days past, like Green Sweegie or Cheese in Super Mario 64, or Carl Jobst and Mark Rutsu in GoldenEye. So to think there was some unknown kid out there whose identity we will likely never know, who won this huge prize to Disney World, I don't know, it just really makes me ponder. But there are a couple of other really weird tournaments. There's this one called the Nintendo Power Wimble Donkey Kong Cup, which certainly features Donkey Kong, but it takes place on the hard court, which is truly insane, given Wimbledon takes place on a grass court, and they have a grass court in the game. Why name it Wimble Donkey Kong Cup, referencing Wimbledon, if you're not going to put it on a grass court? Again, if there was ever a winner to this tournament, it may have been published in Nintendo Power magazine, but I haven't been able to find that yet. But there's an even weirder tournament in Mario Tennis, for which I have absolutely zero idea what the point was, or if there was ever any prize at all. Some of these were just daily plays for Camp Hyrule, if not a big prize tournament for Blockbuster or Nintendo Power or IGN, but not this one. This one was called Mr. Pickle's Cup, and you can see it on screen, it's in the cartridge. If you have a cartridge, you could play this, and it's just so bizarre. You know, unlike other tournaments where they're mostly these 5-minute back and forth ring games volleying around the court, this one only takes a few seconds to play out. You're Boo on a team with Wario, you play against Paratroopa and Bowser, but the tournament ends after 1 point is played. 1 point in tennis terms. And Bowser's actually trying to win. So like my highest score was 9 rings, and I tried for a good half hour without seeing any gain. Like, what on earth was the point of this Mr. Pickle's ring tournament? It's literally encoded into the hard data, you know, the cartridge of Mario Tennis. Every cartridge around for the N64. I checked and it's even still playable on the Nintendo Switch Online release, which is just like, what in the world? Although, you know, they just didn't change the ROM file for these re-releases, so it's whatever. If it ever was a tournament to submit somewhere like Nintendo Power, it's been lost to time, or at least not found yet. Maybe it's in some dusty old magazine somewhere, maybe there was a prize, Mr. Pickle gave you something, and people got really good at this obscure challenge. But it's just so weird even compared to the typical 5-minute ring tournaments, which feel like they make some kind of coherent sense and have a bit of strategy to them. But like, I'm just at a loss of words on this one. Who even was Mr. Pickles? Was he some kind of developer? Some obscure joke? Could this have been a side minigame that a few devs slipped into Mario Tennis and played against each other for fun while working on the game and finishing it? There are just so many questions and zero answers on this one. A perpetual mystery that frankly, I do not think will ever be answered. Okay, one more addition to this. I tweeted about this Mr. Pickles mystery, and our good friend Rare Gamer, who has a lot of Nintendo 64 knowledge, replied with a theory that this may have been a crossover with some Rugrats franchise stuff. The Rugrats' main character is Tommy Pickles, thus his dad, Mr. Stu Pickles, and Grandpa Lou Pickles could both be Mr. Pickles. The timelines add up pretty well, with Mario Tennis coming out in August 2000, and the Rugrats in Paris movie coming out in November 2000, along with an N64 video game as well. You know, maybe the tournament was to like win a pair of tickets to the premiere, or even just tickets to see the movie. But I did some deep searching and couldn't find any corroborating website, media, magazine blurb, or anything. But I would say it is a pretty good theory, maybe the best theory thus far. The castle courtyard in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is really quite a liminal space when it comes to the Nintendo 64 and Zelda series overall, and is the site of an ongoing mystery that may never be resolved. A couple of things always frustrated me with this area. Of course, one being getting caught by the laser-eyed guards and kicked out repeatedly, especially when you're first playing the game, but another being that you can't press C up to get a good look around here, which is just very unfortunate. There are some areas like this in the game, you know, Castle Town is another, and of course after all these years we know it's because of the way the areas were laid out. We're not in a truly 3D space, or not a fully complete one. You know, the sections of the area are just not built, and the developers didn't want us looking out into some kind of black void, which is understandable. But the whole not getting to look around freely thing is just kind of annoying. It was back then when trying to avoid the guards, and it is now trying to just look around. Thankfully, there's a website, noclip.website, where we can use free camera around in much of Ocarina of Time, including this area. And this is where we can get our best look at this remarkable mystery. If I asked you ahead of time to name all the features of this area, could you do it? Like, recall each little block or section? You know, it's a funny thing because it's so familiar, yet the recall memory of it makes it a challenge. But it goes like this. There's a space you enter with no guards and some barrels. Then there's this hedges block, followed by the 2 fountains block. Then a garden feature block, where you can climb up the stairs and walk over the whole thing. Then we get to the statue on a pedestal block. Quite an ornate statue, though, and as this is the whole point of the video, we will take a closer look at it a little bit later. And then there's that final area where the point of view kind of changes, and it feels like it's a hedge maze, but it's actually just two guards going on the perimeter with another statue in the middle of these hedges, which I bet many just had never noticed before, or at least wouldn't have been able to distinctly remember being there had I not been pointing it out this whole time. And these statues are indeed remarkable and host to this great mystery. Now here's where I give huge credit to fellow YouTuber Majorin, who posts these kinds of no voiceover raw gameplay observations with just text over top, and these can be quite a vibe. In a recent video, Majorin compiled the observation that the statues on the big pedestal are known, while the one above the hedges area is not. So my friends, what is this mysterious statue above the hedges? Well, in order to give ourselves the best leads, we need to build upon what Majorin has researched thus far, that being the other statue or statues. You'll see what I mean. First, the main piece of the pedestal statue has been confirmed to be a render of a statue of Louis XIV, one of the last few kings of France, found in the Palace of Versailles, the Sun King as he was known. The image has been directly matched, which is probably not surprising to those who know about the video game texture matching community, though the image was actually flipped horizontally. But yeah, there it is, the image that was used as the base to make the statue in Ocarina of Time, Zelda's castle courtyard. Now the statue is flanked below by 4 other statues, though they're all the same statue as one another. In this case, Majorin has pointed out that this statue is one called Campagne de Diane, and can be found in the Louvre, the world-famous museum located in Paris, France. 2 of them are facing the correct way, and 2 have been flipped. So there you go, that's this set of statues. And it's not like these statues in particular are all that famous. They're not like Michelangelo's David, or the Statue of Liberty, or the Sphinx, or like famous statues for the sake of statues. They're just these statues that exist, in French museums, and, Louis XIV is well known, Campagne de Diane, not quite as much. But anyways, we get to the other statue, the hedge statue, and this has still not been identified. Not by Majorin, not by the texture matching community, not by anyone. Alas, a mystery from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that has endured for nearly 30 years. Can we crack it? Can we at least bring it to even more attention so that it could be eventually solved? Well, let's find out. So the first place I turn to in a situation like this is of course none other than the esteemed texture matching community. Those guys are absolutely unbelievable, and I figured if they can match the, grass in Yoshi Valley to an obscure visual disc library from the mid-90s, they can probably find the source for this statue. And a brief browse through the video game texture preservation Twitter account does indeed show some absolutely remarkable texture matches in Ocarina of Time, like matching the wood used on the Deku shield to a texture from Sojaitin, or the water effect in the Chamber of Sages to Baku no Oni Sabi 2, or the wood texture from the fishing pond entrance to Visual Disc. And these are generally the building blocks for much as what is put in the game. But the thing is, these libraries are often just what we're seeing. Sort of small tiled textures used as building blocks for walls and floors and whatnot. Not really standalone structures or more distinct features like statues. Those sorts of inclusions in these games can come from things like images in the public domain, or photographs taken by developers. I don't really have any other examples than the ones Majorin pointed out, but you get the idea. In all likelihood, the unknown statue comes from a photograph of a statue, just like the other 2 statues come directly from a photograph. And then, they get flattened out and rendered in a way that a Nintendo 64 video game can take it. And so they end up looking like this, kind of low res, low poly, flattened texture. But hey, it is what it is. This mystery made its way over to the one and only legendary website reddit.com, in which we see this thread, which did garner a good deal of discussion. The OP suggested that, in all likelihood, the statue, if one even exists, was likely located in a French museum, given that the other known statues were also located there. Again, the Louvre and the Palace of Versailles. Of course, this can't be known for sure, but it does make sense. But therein lies a huge problem. There are many of these sorts of statues strewn throughout museums in France. And even that's not a guarantee that it would be in one of these museums. So, like, where do you even begin to go through them? One commenter did indeed go through some and found some pretty interesting possibilities or close calls. Raphael's School of Athens depiction of Plato and Aristotle, Jean-Antoine Houdon's rendition of Cicero, Seneca the Younger, Julius Caesar at the Louvre, but nothing quite exactly fit. And that's the thing, the King Louis statue and Campagne de Diane statues do exactly fit. Not with any photoshopping or editing or changing the angle of the arms, they just exactly fit. Majoran even wrote that they went through many photos of statues and it's still not been found. So, alas. This one here of Michel de l'Hôpital by Eugène Guillaume is getting very close, but it's definitely still not it. And this statue of Pittacus, I genuinely thought this was it at first, but you can just tell it doesn't quite match, and the feet aren't the same. You do wonder if it could be some kind of composite statue, so it might have the hands of Michel de l'Hôpital or Pittacus mixed with the head from another statue, and then once flattened down to the N64 render, we can't tell. This is possible, and it makes the search even harder, if not nearly impossible. Again, if it was some kind of composite image Nintendo assembled here, maybe it could work, but I just don't feel like that's the case. Just given the way these other statues fit so perfectly without any edits. Who knows, though? Another interesting facet is that the Nintendo 3DS version completely changes these statues. Like, they're still inspired by their previous iteration, but they also look completely different. They seem to have been rebuilt to some effect, or even constructed entirely anew. So the 3DS rendering of the statue is a no better hint than the N64 original render. In fact, it may actually lead us astray. And I have to believe the same will be true when it comes to the remake of the game for the Nintendo Switch 2. I just don't imagine that whatever statue ends up in this spot there will have anything to do with the flattened N64 render. Alas, perhaps we will never find out what statue was photographed, flattened, and rendered into this game. As such, can be an enduring mystery in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time on the one and only Nintendo 64. My friends, now here is a mystery and something to ponder that shaped and changed the entirety of gaming history, and something that we may fully never understand. So, Samus Aran and her Metroid series were immensely popular and beloved games for the NES and SNES. Super Metroid is a true classic, and one of the most legendary speed games to this very day. But once we entered the Nintendo 64 era, just like Jacques de Gaultier of Temiskaming, Quebec, Samus and Metroid vanished for an entire console generation. There is no Metroid on the Nintendo 64. And while most of these franchises seem to make their way over to the N64 in 3D, Metroid did not. But why not? Well, the story goes something like this. At some point during the N64 era, Nintendo reached out to a third-party developer and asked them, what do you think about making a Metroid game for us, for the N64? Could such a thing be possible? And the answer apparently was not exactly a no, but more of a, we're not sure if we really can. Both sides, the story goes, both Nintendo and this unknown developer, were genuinely unsure how to make a Metroid work in 3 dimensions, and especially when it came to the movement of Samus on the Nintendo 64 controller. How do you translate that kind of lonely, dark, atmospheric 2D exploration into the early 3-dimensional world, and with the good movement that you can move through and kind of naturally made this a good speed game, on what can be at times the clunky N64 controller? And no one was really willing to figure out how to solve all that yet. I mean, it would have been insane if you could. You can imagine the Metroid type of music in the Super Mario 64 sound font, That would have been insane. But here's the thing, we don't know who the developer was, whoever was approached by Nintendo to ponder the creation of a Metroid 64. The name is a mystery to this day, as well as the extent of it being actually explored, or just kind of bandied around a boardroom meeting table. One rumor is that it may have been Rare, which of course makes some sense. The same Rare at the peak of its powers on the N64, making what may have been the greatest string of video games of all time. It's truly remarkable to just look at what they did in that era, and to imagine if a Metroid 64 was in among these games, how different it would have been. It's somewhat interesting to ponder one of Rare's more niche masterpieces of this era, Jet Force Gemini, which is a very sci-fi game where you travel to these strange worlds in spaceships, use laser blasty items to defeat weird enemies. It's pretty Metroid-ish. And in fact, it's said that a developer, Martin Wakely, who worked on Jet Force Gemini, has mentioned a Metroid 64 as something that was pondered around the boardroom, though it's unknown if this was really the true, fully legit Nintendo approach and wonder about the possibility, or just something that came up in more casual discussion. Like, could the Rare lads have just been pondering this on their own doing, and Nintendo actually officially asked another developer entirely? Maybe someone like HAL Labs or even Square Enix before their relationship dissolved. Who knows? And whether Rare started to work on something for Metroid that became Jet Force Gemini, or it was just, inspired here and there by Metroid-like environments and other games, well, we'll likely never know either. But there's something else to this all, about how a Metroid 64 would not have just been an additional cool N64 game, but may have changed speedrunning forever. The Metroid series, and especially Metroid Prime, were hugely significant when it comes to the development of the wider speedrunning scene, especially in a full game setting. Did you know the term any percent actually comes from the Metroid series? Because at the end of Super Metroid and Metroid Prime, it tells you how much percent of the game you actually completed. Now, of course, this isn't unique to these games. The Donkey Kong games do it as well, including Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong 64, but the percentage scores were very important in the Metroid games because of what happened in 2003, the early years of full-game real-time attack speedrunning. When Metroid Prime arrived, not on the N64 but on the GameCube, its quality and intensity resulted in it being one of the first games ever seriously pursued in a speedrunning context at a full game scale. The movement was just right, the length of the game was just right, it had all these things going for it where it just felt natural to speedrun the whole game. In 2003, a runner by the name of Nolan Radix Pflug decided to speedrun Metroid Prime in full. But you see, this Radix fella wasn't just any random gent off the street. No, he was heavily involved in the creation of a little website called Speed Demos Archive, a website that, to that point, hosted Quake demo files. And Radix had indeed speedrun Quake for many years to that point, and submitted many of these demo files. But for one reason or another, Metroid Prime stood out to Radix, so he decided to try speedrunning the whole game, which wasn't something all that commonly done in that day. And when he successfully completed a run he was happy with, he wanted somewhere to share it. Mind you, this was before the days of YouTube, Vimeo, or even Dailymotion, so hosting a video file on a private server or personal website was the best way to share it around the internet. And that's exactly what Radix did, uploading his Metroid Prime run of 100% in 1 hour 37 minutes to Speed Demos Archive. And it's this which sparked more interest in speedrunning the game. Of course, some players didn't want to do the full 100%, skipping what they could, beating the game as quickly as possible. Some early runs of the game would be in 37% completion, as seen on the end screen. But as strategies evolved and more skips were found, this number started to vary. To overcome this fluctuating number issue, beat the game in any way you can, with any skips you can, in any percentage you can, was shortened down to any percent. And that's what I think is so crazy. Like, if Metroid 64 ended up happening, the entire history of speedrunning is likely different. Maybe the game isn't as good or speedrunnable or interesting to Radix in particular. Maybe the game doesn't have the percentage completed at the end of it, though it probably would have had it since Super Metroid had it as well, but, butterfly effect and all. Nintendo did approach a studio, they pondered Metroid 64, and it could have had endless repercussions on the history of speedrunning. Not to mention it was the Speed Demos Archive guys who eventually launched Games Done Quick, and all the history that stems from there. And Metroid Prime was literally the first game after Quake to have a run hosted on Speed Demos Archive. And so that's the beauty of this particular mystery. We'll probably never know for sure who Nintendo approached, and if Rare was the one who they fully approached or if it was someone else, or what an N64 era 3D Metroid would have been like. But we do know how the absence of this game affected speedrunning for the decades to come. And to think how it may have been different if Samus had showed up a generation earlier on the good old Nintendo 64 cartridge. Stay true, my friends, and I will see you in the next stream or video.